Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Minnesota Rock Stars podcast. And today we are discussing apple trees. In my mind, I kind of think about this time of year right now, kind of like stage two. Like for me, stage one is, the postseason scouting, shed hunting, thinking about different strategies that we could use here for this upcoming year. And stage two is we're going to start getting our hands dirty here with planting trees this weekend. I got an order of trees that are going to be showing up. I have some white spruce, some red pine that are coming in, and apple trees. We're going to be getting after some apple trees. I know I already put a few in the ground, but this is that time of year where you should be thinking, what can you do to help increase the chances of you hopefully harvesting some deer this year? And one of those strategies that we use is planting trees. So if you're into planting trees, and specific apple trees, this is going to be a great podcast for you. So let's get after it and let's get to the podcast. Welcome, everyone. Today I am sitting here with a good family friend of the Call family, Art Reuck. And Art is extremely intelligent when it comes to apple trees. I don't know if you want to admit that or not, but you are. Compared to anyone else out there, Art, that I know of, you are the man when it comes to apple trees, and it's basically that time that people need to start thinking planting, and I think this is a great topic to kind of go over today.
I know a lot less than the people in the commercial orchards or experienced people. I kind of learned by making mistakes, and I'm real good at the mistake part.
Well,
So,
then you remember. When you make a mistake, then you remember.
That sounds like a school teacher talking now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk apple trees. But first of all, Art, why don't you kind of just let everybody know who you are, what you've done, throughout your life, and kind of where you are right now.
Okay. I grew up in, we'll say, northern Minnesota, the northern half, and a bit combination between a farm and a resort, and Dad being a carpenter and doing everything else that you do to make a living. And I've worked 40 years as a farm veterinarian in central Minnesota, mainly on dairy cattle, some on beef, some on feedlots, and occasional hog. Place I live on, we bought about 35 years ago, and just happens that Joe's grandfather cornered on my place, and his brother and his uncle and his cousin live right next to me. So I got very good neighbors where I'm at now.
Yeah, it's a good combination of people out there, and I know on my last podcast, one point that was brought up is your neighbors. Who's around you and stuff, and I think it's mutual, and we say we both have good neighbors to have, and it's important to definitely have that. But a veterinarian. Let's hear a wild story about being a vet. Maybe something that sticks with you, a memory of an incident that happened while you were on the job that that you'll never forget, good or bad.
I remember a severe storm in January, and our small town vet clinic. At that time, the veterinarians treated most of the milk fevers. We had, I believe, 22 milk fevers in a 24-hour period. And the last one, I ended up 20-some miles from town, 18 inches of snow, ended up in the ditch, and managed to get a hold of another farmer to come pull me out. I spent the night on a couch in his yard. But it's great to know people like that can help you out when you're so far from town. That's and lots of experiences with animals. I hate to even think of them because I've been retired for 5 years. I'm glad they're over with. Getting kicked, getting bit, losing a finger. I can go on and on.
Yeah. What was the most difficult animal that you had to work with?
I am not a good horse person.
Okay.
And it's hard to work with horses.
Sure.
And I did not do much small animal. I mainly worked with dairy cattle. And it's great. I have farmers I worked for that I knew 4 generations of the family, including your Uncle Steve. I know 4 generations of that family. That's they become so close to you when you've
Mm-hmm.
worked for people that long.
Do you feel that being a vet, like you have a extreme passion for the outdoors?
Yes,
Do you feel being a vet kind of played a role? I mean, maybe your passion for the outdoors played a role in you becoming a veterinarian?
I do, and it played a role on where I worked because uh, most of the smaller farmers in certain areas are also interested in deer hunting, fishing, duck hunting when we had ducks.
Yeah.
That's kind of a change there, but we shared a lot of stories. It wasn't always cows, fishing stories, hunting stories, family stories, tears when family members were sick. Lots of things were shared.
Yeah. Um, no, it's cool. That you're able to help out so many people for so many years, and animals as well and whatnot. But as far as hunting goes, what are some of the memories that you have of hunting growing up? Maybe your first memory that you have being out in the woods and doing some hunting, or maybe it's not even hunting. Maybe it's just something outdoor related.
I growing up in Zone One up north with used to be a 9-day season. I remember my dad and my uncle and my grandpa would hunt some, but he mostly sat near his old station wagon in the field. But my dad and my uncle and people would come and stay at our house, some for family friends, hunt 9 days, hunt hard every day. And if those 5 to 7 people would get one buck, one doe, and two fawns, they were very happy. That was a successful season. And times were tough. Maybe tough, almost like this last year up in Zone One was. Uh, I was up there. I will say I was bow hunting this fall, but I didn't even buy a license or take a bow up. I just went up and camped and spent a little time on the old family farm there, sitting in the tree stand visiting friends. It looked like there was a doe and a fawn track near my camping spot, and nothing but a wolf track back in the woods behind it. I never saw a deer in one of my favorite funnels, and I didn't even buy a license because I didn't want to shoot a deer up there
Hmm.
this year. Just wanted to get out and get the old memories back.
Yeah. Um, Now you've been hunting up there roughly how many years?
I try and get up there every year, and I started hunting when I was 13, so that would put me well past 50 years.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you've obviously had some good, excuse me, good years up there. Uh, Obviously this year was tough, with the winters that we've had, and also with the wolves. Um, can you recall some of those good years? I mean, that you saw a lot of deer. I mean, was there a correlation there, with the wolves like there are now, or do you think, like, what I'm trying to get at here is, do you feel it was more the winter or the wolves that are playing a factor with our deer numbers right now?
I think the winter played a big factor up there, just like it did
Hmm.
somewhat here. And then we didn't have the wolves there in the 60s, maybe occasional one, but not often. Or
Hmm.
the 70s, we did not have the wolves. Now, the story was up there last year that some beef cattle a half mile to the east had some calves killed, and the federal trapper got all the wolves out except one. And I, my experience, even I used to hunt south of International Falls, when wolves seemed to come through, the deer really hid or moved out for a period.
Yeah, I've seen that around here too, where there was one time with my buddy Pete, we were hunting, and we went up there after a snowfall, and there was more wolf tracks than deer tracks. I mean, you couldn't even find a deer
Right.
track, and it makes it tough. And you as a conservationist, going up there hunting this year, you weren't even looking to harvest the deer because you knew what the numbers were like up there. Um, but you still want to get out and enjoy, being out in the woods and seeing friends and whatnot. Now you have that opportunity to get up north and kind of get away from things. How has hunting um, kind of played a factor with your immediate family? like your two daughters and your wife and stuff? Because I know those guys hunt. So I mean, how
That's
does that play a factor, and how much does that mean to you?
that my wife hunts. Usually, we like a rifle rut hunt, and she'll hunt 3 to 4 days. She begins to get tired of it, then she might go out in the evening, and usually she gets her deer within 3 days.
Mhm.
Maybe two. I remember one year when we were first married up north, she shot both our deer early in season. We were hunting up there, and my daughters hunt when they can. One of my daughters hunted this year, and she managed to come home, and we were sitting in a box stand together. She shot her deer, and one shot, she killed it. We had a nice doe to eat. So,
That's fun when you can bring everybody together. We kind of view it as, it's a holiday. The only time we really get together with our families and whatnot is a lot of times it's during holidays and hunting, and it's a great sport. I mean, we love being out there and the strategies that are all involved. I mean, that's why you're here today, to talk trees and whatnot. But even more importantly, it's that camaraderie and being together with the families and stuff that trumps everything in the end, 100%. But yeah, the reason why I have you here today is to kind of talk apple trees a little bit. What kind of started your obsession, if you will, with apple trees?
I remember up north we had a property that had one doggle crab on it, and I used to ride my bicycle over to that tree and fill my pockets with these 1 inch crab apples, maybe inch and a quarter. And I learned to like them, and throw them in my mouth, chew the whole thing up, seeds and all.
Oh boy.
They're that little, but I learned to like crab apples. That probably started the obsession. I did always try and grow trees, transplant trees, spruce, pines, evergreens, trying this and that.
Yeah. I know I've seen your property before, and you talk about diversity. Your property is pretty diverse. You have agriculture, you have some swamp, you have pine, spruce, cedar, apple trees. What else am I forgetting?
Uh, I have, with your uncle renting my property, I have alfalfa and corn, and I have some food plots that are corn. I used to have clover plots. I used to try brassica. I still throw a little brassica out, but it doesn't get much use when you have apples, corn, and alfalfa. And the corn stands through the winter until the deer clean it out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you got a nice thing going there, and it's been a lot of work to get it to the point that it's at right now. But I tell you what, when I've been over on your property, you can just see the amount of hours that you've put in making that property what it is, and it's a pretty darn good property. You guys have a lot of success over there when it comes to hunting, and there's other things that are that you do to maximize your success rate. Not only just that, but I think you treat your property, kind of like a sanctuary. You don't go in there a whole lot, and you kind of leave it for the deer. And you kind of talking about trails and stuff. Just everything you do on your property to me seems like you do it for the deer.
I, most of it is. I do have some apple trees that are for our use at the family, and a few of the trees I have are back on the edge of the sanctuary. I hate to visit them, but I do like to go back and get a sample of those apples to see what they taste like, different times of the year of the ripening season.
What do you get some type of feeling inside of you? Because like when you go out and see these apple trees and turn into what they've become from all those hours and labor that you've put into them, when you see them produce apples, I mean, do you get that little feeling inside of you that says, yeah, this worked?
It's some of those trees producing apples are from seed that I collected from wild trees, and I grew them, and now they're producing apples that the deer eat. And some are apples that are, we'll say, deer sized that the deer eat, and others are just, I call them bird apples or your flowering crab type. They're tiny apples which the deer don't eat till later in the year. But in my mind, the deer prefer an apple that is about the size of a golf ball, a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. And I've seen deer in my yard or my home orchard, which is right next to my yard, mowed. But they seem to always go to the chestnut crab.
Sure.
Of course, that's the first tree I planted. Perhaps that doe trained those fawns for generations now to come to that tree first. But when I have bigger apples out there, the deer will take a bite out of the apple. But I see them go to these smaller crabs, about golf ball size, slightly bigger. They're really called apple crabs. But they'll put the whole thing in their mouth and chew it up, you know. And I enjoy sitting there in the winter and watching those deer come in. They'll go there, then they'll go to the corn plot on the other side of the house, and they'll go back to the apple trees, or they'll go to the apple trees and go to the alfalfa. Uh, Sit there and see how many I can count, or go check the windows on the various side of the house. Uh, a year ago was a tough winter, but we had
Yeah.
up to 45 there, and the corn was cleaned out. We lost deer. We had a dead buck 10 yards from the edge of our lawn.
Mm.
And I had seen him in January, but he was limping and very thin then.
So you said which tree was it? The first one you planted?
Chestnut crab.
Chestnut crab. So how old is that tree?
It's probably 30 some years old.
30
It's
some years.
showing its age.
How much fruit do you feel it produces? I mean,
Oh,
is there a way to gauge that?
not for me. There's
Sure.
there's there's good years and bad years. They do tend to produce every other year with maybe a light crop in between. There's been years with a late frost takes out all the blossoms, you have nothing. Just like a farmer, you get a late frost on your bean field, it hurts, you know.
Yeah.
That's huh.
So speaking of frost and stuff, like when is it the ideal to plant apple trees? When should people really start paying attention to, okay, I need to get some apple trees and get them in the ground?
I'm on fairly light soil. And when you're planting bare root, I would get those in just as soon as I can and the ground not be frozen. And I know some other things I do when we plant. I think weed control is important. I will spray a spot with Roundup uh, the late summer before if I know I'm going to plant a tree in that area. I'll spray about a 6 foot circle. Otherwise, you got to get rid of the sod. And when you dig the hole, shake the sod out, get the roots out, so there's not competing for moisture. I like a fabric weed barrier. On the drier soils, I won't plant them in sand, but on drier soils, I like moisture holding crystals. Throw a few in the hole. If I know my pH is a bit low, I'll throw a handful of pell lime in there and work it into the soil around the outside of the hole. The fabric with staples is important, which I said. And most of us, if you're planting a tree for wildlife, you aren't going to be there to water as often as you would as a tree closer to home. I those crystals are important if you're on lighter soil. If you're in heavy clay muck, then they probably aren't needed.
So how's that work with those crystals? Like how do you incorporate that?
The way I use them on apple trees, I throw them in the hole around the roots and add some dirt on top. And I put a bucket of water in, half 2 3 gallons, let it soak in, add some more dirt, maybe a pinch of pell lime, because I know the pH tends to be a little bit low on my lighter soils. But when I get down near the heavier soil, the pH is good for
So
apples.
what do these crystals look like exactly?
Uh, some are tiny, moisture holding crystals. I get them from a soil and water conservation district in an adjacent county, and they have tree mats too. Buy a small bag for $5. They recommend them for planting pine trees or spruce. Put the crystals in a bucket of water and dip your trees before you plant them. Dip
Uh,
the roots in them.
yep. Speaking of watering, um, last year we had a drought, and I was watering trees, and maybe they differ from apple trees and spruce and pine. I was watering my pine trees, and I was bringing water to the apple trees, and they still died off, most of them. Is it harmful at all watering in droughts? Is it harmful to put cold water, well water on trees? I mean, is there anything that could hurt or damage trees when watering? Because I mean, is it even helping? Because with that drought last year, like I said, I was watering quite a bit, and I still lost a lot of trees.
I don't think the cold water matters if you put it on the roots, on the ground level. Perhaps it'd affect the vegetation if you have a 100-degree day and you dump cold water on it. Perhaps. I'm
Sure.
not sure of that, but it might. Now, I know we mentioned some newly planted trees are under irrigation and they grew well.
Hmm.
Uh, you have to catch the edge of an irrigation rig. Those that are close to my house, I try and water them twice a week that are newly planted. And then later in the summer, once a week. And late in the fall, water enough to keep trees alive. But after leaf fall or near the end of the green leaves, sometimes I don't like to water too much because I don't like the new growth in the fall. Uh, it can die off from winter damage, cold damage. It needs a hardening off period in the fall. So not a lot of water, but enough to keep things alive. It's hard
Sure.
to judge exactly where that is.
You brought up a great point. Before we started this podcast here, we were out on my property looking around at some of the apple trees I have planted, and we did some pruning. Art gave me some suggestions on what I can do to maximize, the property that I have here. The one thing that really stands out to me that you mentioned, um, do you plant more apple trees or fewer apple trees and focus on maintaining those apple trees? Quality over quantity, what is it?
I'm laughing from my experience, and you have had friends that have had the same experience. But it's very easy. Well, I can get a deal on 10 apple trees or 50, so much cheaper, and it doesn't take long to put them in the ground. You know, and we can do that, and my buddy will help, and we'll get it done. Well, that's only half of the project. You're much better off to whatever your expectations are to begin with, cut it down by a half or cut it to even a third, and plan on taking care of those trees. That means uh, maybe aluminum wire screen or 1/4 inch mesh to keep mice, voles, rabbits from eating the trunk in the winter. That needs to extend up until the first limbs or even as high as the snow will get. It includes a fence to keep the deer from browsing it. Uh, 2x4 welded wire will work. I also like the cement reinforcing wire. I get it from Menards, 150-foot roll. Cut 10 sections out of it at 15 feet, put that around. Deer can reach through it a little bit, so the bigger circle keeps them from reaching too far in. 2x4 inch mesh would keep them away, but it's not quite as sturdy or as tall. Pluses and minuses to both. Then you need fence posts or something to support the wire. That all takes time. And I know how it goes. Well, we'll stick the trees in, and next weekend when we're up here, we'll get them fenced. Well, I can't come up because this has happened on that. Plant half as many trees and get it done right to begin with and water them. Then the next year, you can go a little bit deeper into planting the apple trees.
Trial and error too, like you said. You're gonna learn as you go,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and all of a sudden you spend $1,000 on trees because you quote unquote got a good deal on them, and there you have 50, 60 trees to put in or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you lose half of them because you messed up on something. Well, now all of a sudden you're out that money. You mentioned that you should put in just as much in cost to get them going and maintain them as you should on the trees themselves. Is that what you mentioned?
Yes. If you're spending 1,000 on trees, you better spend another 1,000 roughly on supplies to maintain them. Uh,
It's a great point, and I mean it's kind of the rule of thumb for everything, right? If you're going to buy something, you want to make sure it's running properly, whether it's putting the right oil in it or the right gas or whatever. Let's go back to when we first got out of the side by side today and started looking at things from a perspective of being out on my field today. Kind of go over some of the things that you look for in a spot to plant apple trees, because this is something I've always thought of, like, can I plant an apple tree in the middle of my woods? Will it be successful if I plant it in the middle of my woods? Does it have to be on the east side of the field, south side of the field, west side, north side? Like, some of those things I was thinking about. Just kind of briefly go over some of the things that you were looking at today, maybe the best spots to look at planting them. just kind of some of those things you mentioned to me.
I I think one thing is they grow better where they have the best soil. So, do you have decent soil? I myself will stay away from what's all sand with no topsoil. I know one person in southern Wisconsin's growing them on what appears to be low sand, and he's having some success. I won't try it because I have a variety of soils. I go for the better soils. Apple trees probably need at least 8 hours of sunlight a day. So they need to be spaced out. You're getting full size trees that will grow into full size, probably 25 foot apart. I got to admit, I'm guilty of crowding them closer because I always find something else they need to plant. But 25 feet apart. And do they have exposure to sunlight from the south mainly, but also to the east and to the west? Other important factor is winter burn or sun scald that occurs on the south and southwest side of trees in Minnesota. And when that apple tree is young and has smooth bark, the winter sun will heat it. And when the sun goes below the tree line, the temperature quickly drops and that bark will split on the south side or southwest side and damage your tree. So you need to do something to protect it. Some people will paint the trunks of that part with interior white latex paint, mix 50% with water. And I have another buddy that he adds some grout to it. He thinks that may deter the wood burr from biting, apple borer from biting into the tree, chewing in. I don't have a lot of problem with that. I've had a few of them. He adds that. You could shade the trunk on the southwest side by letting weeds grow there, some device, or I use the aluminum window screen to keep the mice and rabbits from chewing on it. And then I get an extra piece and fold it over. It's stapled together on the south and southwest side to give more shade to that side of the tree. I use a paper stapler to staple this aluminum window screen to itself. And usually as the tree grows, the staples will pop, but you do need to check it occasionally. And the bottom of that window screen needs to be tucked in the dirt so those mice and voles don't come in underneath. Or when I have fabric, I went to putting rock around the base of the tree, covering the bottom of that.
So you kind of have you lay the mat flat and then kind of work it up like a cone, and then put your rocks and stuff and dirt over the top of that so they can't get underneath it, correct? Right?
I leave a little dip when I plant the trees if it's on lighter soil,
Mhm.
so I can water and hold water, but then I'll put the rock as a cone around the bottom of that
Okay.
window screen. And I get it, if I'm not doing that, I'll tuck it down and put dirt around it so they can't get in. I staple it together like 2 sheets of paper. Sometime we could demonstrate how I do that. We could be done. But that works well. And what I get rambling on. I lost where the
No,
main
you're good.
question
We're
was.
just basically like you're starting with that bare
Yeah,
ground and where you want to plant based off of
yep,
shade and all that stuff. Yeah, far enough away from maybe a wood line, kind of like
yes.
where they were on my field there. But uh, what about like tubes? Like you see those tree tubes. Are those a good thing, bad thing? I've kind of heard mixed opinions on that.
I I have not used them a lot on those. I've used them on other trees. I have one friend that's having success with them. Um, I had some struggles, and they were the old varieties of tubes from 30 years ago, not vented. I have had struggles with them, but I know a guy that's using him on wild apple trees that he buys, I think from Idaho. He buys wild apple trees, and he's having good luck. I just haven't. And if they aren't vented properly or enough, you can get too much growth in the fall, which leads to winter dieback. I had that experience with some things, and I just haven't quite figured out the best way or location to use them. And it may vary with the type of soil, the location. Being on kind of a prairie type environment, it can get hotter and colder quicker. The situation might be much different in other locations.
Sure.
Oh, what else to plant? Red cedar trees can spread disease. Uh, most of the varieties I got are fairly resistant in my dry climate. They show a little bit fairly resistant. If you're in a damper climate, it could be different, but that's red cedar. White cedar, not a problem. But if you're planting red cedar, or if you're close to them, it's something to consider. Maybe I'm going to have to pick certain varieties of apples or not plant one or the other.
You mentioned soil was the number one thing that you look for when planting uh, an apple tree. Uh, I know one of the videos I watched out there, they talked about frost and getting a tree exposed to the sun as soon as possible in the morning to help get the frost off, or help work the frost off so the frost isn't sitting there on that tree, until 11 o'clock when the sun finally gets above the tree
Please.
line to help get that off. Is that something you got to take into consideration?
I think that's important, and it's probably important for the disease control because many of the diseases spread in humid or moist weather. You get the sun up to dry those leaves off, good airflow, you're less likely to catch the cedar apple rust from that nearby cedar tree.
So something like on a kind of a ridge top maybe would work a little bit, maybe for a location, with the wind being able to come across, maybe not in a low land area
That,
planting.
that's right. I have trees in the edge of the low area because
Okay,
that's my better soil.
sure,
They are growing the best there.
okay,
It's more prone to get a late frost. It'll kill all the blossoms,
sure,
but that's part of the process because
yeah,
the land above it's in egg production.
sure,
That's
sure.
huh.
And then
Hmm.
I don't know, you kind of hit on distance. You talked about paint, watering, shade. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all good. What like you talked about prepping the soil. You spray the soil or the weeds or grass or whatever the year
Yes,
before you're going to plant. Um, Now you get the tree in the ground. Now, what type of care do you need to give that tree throughout the growing season?
I uh, I water it and I try and look at it for insect problems, gopher mounds, which are a real bugger. If you got pocket gophers, you got to trap them. Uh, I got to say that gopher hawk is a great trap. Gopher hawk is a great gopher
Okay.
trap.
Yeah.
Uh, that's what I use. And I do help out your uncle on the hayfield with him. If he can't get him his way, I'll take the gopher hawk and try. We had one we couldn't get last fall, but I got him this spring. So
Nice.
I have seen aphids on the underside of the leaves one year, and then I did spray the trees.
So what
Under
type of spray are you putting on there?
Oh, I am not real current on the spray.
Okay.
Your people with orchards could do much better,
Sure.
better advice. I do use a three-way spray on the trees by my house that I call the home orchard. And most of the deer apple trees are just ignored and on their own, other than if they're getting enough aphids or something to damage a young tree that wouldn't survive. But they're on their own without spray.
Do you fertilize?
Uh, I will drop. Um, they're expensive, but I like those fruit tree spikes and they're easy to handle. I will drop them on the trees by the home orchard and a few select deer trees, certain ones that I like, I'll put a few by. But I've heard people say one shovel of rotted chicken manure thrown at the bottom of the tree works fairly well.
How about pruning?
Pruning,
Go ahead.
that should be about done by now, is getting that time. If you have a tree there on your property, first thing you should do is take out the dead wood. Second thing I say is, other than the central leader, which is the middle of the tree growing up, take off branches that are growing up or growing down, straight up or straight down. You may want to prune to have the first scaffold or the first limbs coming off the tree about 5 to 6 feet off the ground. Uh, about that high so the apples fall, the deer can reach them underneath. Otherwise, some of these wild trees out in the open grow as bushes. They work too, but I think they're slower to grow. Um, and don't prune more than 1/3 of the branches off a tree a year. Start by taking the dead stuff off.
I think you mentioned two crossing branches,
Yes,
right?
crossing branches, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the reason for that is what?
They rub and you'll damage a branch. Take your pick which one you're going to keep, take the other one off. And I cut them fairly close to the main trunk, leaving the collar where it grows off the main trunk or off the branch.
I think, I don't remember if you mentioned this or not, but how often are you looking to prune?
I just do it in after the end of February, after the coldest part of the year.
Is that yearly then, or is that how many years?
I do the trees that are in my home orchard yearly.
Okay.
The deer trees, they get done if I get to it. And as far as I can reach, some years I'm on snowshoes and there's probably 200 trees out there. So I don't get them all done, and some I just ignore. They're on their own.
Yeah. Yep. Well, there's only so much a person can do in a day and in a year and all that good stuff. How about when it comes to strategies? Did you have a strategy when planting your trees based off of your hunting spots?
Probably was more luck and available space is what I did. I planted some by the house, and then I did get some trees from my wife's grandma, who started trees from seed for decades and had them on many farms. She'd grow them from seed, and there'd be a variety of everything from crab apples, flowering crab size, yellow crabs, larger red apples. I planted those various locations, and I did kind of string them along that seam between the swamp, or I guess we should call it a wetland now, and the upper ag land, which I didn't want to take out of production. So kind of that seam where it's not too wet and not impinging on the ag land. And they just seem to stretch out farther and farther. I think I have 5 locations on my farm with apple trees, but some of them have been growing together as I planted more trees that are over a quarter mile long.
Now, you have trees that drop apples from what month to what month?
We have trees that will drop from August through March, and some are still holding now, although not dropping. Drop times do vary with the climate in the heat. One of my trees had been reliable for dropping about October 25th for years, started dropping early this year, but with the drought, it did drop early. It's the first year I've seen that. And it did hold some later too, but not as late as usual. Now, what it would perform like in other climates is hard to say. It could perform differently in a warmer climate, different soils, things like that.
What are some of those early dropping trees?
I like early dropping trees that are hardy for our climate. My experience here, I'll say, is central Minnesota and somewhat into north central Minnesota. Central Minnesota is not Minneapolis, St. Paul, regardless of the Twin Cities media. It's not.
Yeah.
But you and I actually live in southern Minnesota by a few miles.
Yeah.
So my experience is here, but you need hardy apples, and don't plant dwarf trees. You probably would not find those in rural Minnesota at our nurseries. If you're in the metro, you possibly could, but you want a bigger tree that's above deer browse lines. You don't want something with a dwarf rootstock.
No.
What?
You.
Oh, varieties. Oh,
sure. Yeah.
Okay. My rough choice is Trailman will start to drop in August. It's a hardy tree. They say up to zone 2, with some Canadians are planting it up in Alberta. Next tree I really like, Dalgo. It's a grafted. Dalgo is different than some of the Dalgos you see are seedlings. Seedlings have a lot of variety, regardless of what you read. I've grown Dalgos and bought Dalgo seedlings. But your grafted Dalgo you can get from your local nurseries. Pretty reliable. It starts to drop about Labor Day. It's pretty reliable then. And then one of my favorite trees that I think bow hunters in central Minnesota, probably northern Wisconsin, you need to plant a chestnut crab. It's excellent eating, just a great apple, makes great applesauce. It drops from about the first week of September to about the first week of October for me. And that's just ideal for a bow hunter. Maybe you want it in a staging area, somewhere like that. And then you go on, there's a variety of apples. I do like those apple crabs that 1 inch golf ball size, a little bigger, a little smaller. There's other apples. There's one called Kerr crab. I pronounce it Keir. I'm not sure what's right. Kerr. It's a crab that size. Even your Harold Red, Harrelson, a little bigger apple, but they'll produce in October. I get on towards the end of October. I like that big dog tree is what I call it. It's a rootstock, grew from an apple tree, been in my yard when I bought the farm. And that's the one that this year started dropping early with the drought, but I did not water it at all.
Okay.
It's a hard apple, hard, uh, just firm, hard.
Sure.
I think it persists late. The deer will eat it. They like it. There's usually a scrape under that tree every year in my yard, and it'll carry deer through the winter. Um, there's another one I call the Buckman crab, and it's a doggo seedling that I bought. I have about 10 of those. This one has a nice apple that holds late, and again, about that inch and a half size. And there's other ones. Golden hornet holds late. That's more of a flowering crab. This last snowstorm, I have a flowering crab your grandpa gave me when I first moved there. The deer were under that, scrounging up whatever they could find.
Wow.
The robins were in it today,
Yeah.
eating. There's usually a partridge or two, or grouse, if you want to call them that, sitting in it.
Yeah.
Uh,
So basically, what you're saying is there are apple trees that can drop. And you can strategize on when you're out there hunting. Like you said, there's an apple tree for bow hunters, there's an apple tree for firearm hunters, and there's an apple tree for muzzleloader and light bow hunters
and
out
for
there.
winter survival.
And survival, yeah.
Winter survival.
What which one's your favorite? I think you already told me, but which one's your favorite?
If I have to eat one, it's chestnut crab. And Kinder Crisp is a great apple. And I have another tree. We just had a few apples off this year. Nothing about deer, but St. Edmund's russet is really a unique apple late. Nothing that you'd probably plant for deer. But
No, in my mind right now, and probably a lot of listeners out there, you're kind of talking in a different language when you're naming these trees, because I have no clue what these trees are, and I'm gonna have to get your help on this. You're gonna have to send me the spelling on them, and kind of direction where we can find these. But I know you have created your own apple trees. You've alluded to one, maybe more. How many have you grafted and grown your own and named your own?
Most of those I've named are seedlings that I grew from apple seed. There are a couple that I purchased a bunch of doggo seedlings from the Soil and Water Conservation District. One of those I put a name on because I called it the Buckman crab. Yep. Because it seems to be a good winter food source for deer, and big dog does too. I have to say that. That is some sort of rootstock, which I have seen up in northern Minnesota, just north central, not far north. I've seen it under trees there. I suspect one of the suppliers used that for a few years on their grafting trees. But yeah, I've named some there, and there's other great apples. I might just back up for a minute here. I'm spending more time, I know, but we're getting to the time when apple trees are going to bloom. First part of May, another month roughly, maybe quicker. But if you have hunting property, it's time to get out and see what you have. Find those blooming trees. I take a picture of it so I can identify the location. If there's some way you can identify that tree, then check it during the summer. See what size the apple is. Is it a bird crab, smaller? Is it larger that a deer might eat? When does it drop? You might find a tree that really stands out that you could graft or get somebody to graft. Or if it's on your property, clear some of the brush around it, some of the smaller trees, get more sunlight to it. And it's the same for plums too. You might find a plum thicket that can be a benefit. I see the deer use plums more, I think, a little bit farther north than they do down in ag country, where I have, when the plums ripen, we have corn, we have alfalfa, we have a few apples starting to ripen. They don't get quite as much use as they do in more of a wooded location.
What would you say? I'm going to go on one side of the spectrum and then on the other side of the spectrum, the biggest mistake. Well, before I go there, what are you looking for? Like when you said when you go out looking for the apple trees to bloom, like when you go out and you know the leaves really aren't on the trees yet, or maybe they are already, and like what are you looking for? Like I know what mine looks like, but maybe you go walking in the woods. How can you identify like that is a plum or an apple tree? I mean, is it like a rose garden sitting right there in the middle of the woods? What is? Can you give kind of our listeners an image to what they should be looking for?
Other than a few of the plums, maybe the Canadian plum, which is different than American wild plum, but most of the plums and apples will not be in the woods, but on the edge of the woods or the edge of a riverbank where they get sunlight on the south side. So then plums have more of a filtered white blossom, and the apple trees tend to have a bigger blossom and more uh, extent white, more white.
Okay.
You see a large patch of white, walk over, it's probably an apple blossom. If it's a filtered white, it could be a plum or some of the other shrubs that have fruit.
What
And
what time of year is that you should be out there looking?
first part of May.
First part of
If
May.
you got a flowering crab that's blooming, you probably need to look. And you can. I find wild crab apples on the management area that's near me. I've found half a dozen trees there. None of them have been outstanding for hunting around that I have been able to identify. They seem to drop earlier. Um, there are wild trees on some of the Sportsman's Club land. There is a nice big apple, cooking apple, growing along the river bottom on
Nice.
some of the Rice Sportsman land. So,
Well, don't tell people exactly where it's at, otherwise they'll all be gone.
yeah.
um, going back to planting, and I'll finish up here with a couple questions. What do you feel is the biggest mistake that either you have made or the average Joe makes when planting trees that's setting their tree up for failure?
Planting too many at once. Start slow. If you want to start, plant a chestnut crab. It's your bow hunting spot. Maybe 2 trees. Take care of them one summer, and maybe they'll need some water the second summer yet. Depends on the soil, what it's like. Plant 1, 2, maybe 3. Everybody thinks, oh, I get a deal on 10. 10 is a lot of work when you're hauling water. It's a lot of work. Plant a few and take care of them.
How about where can people find trees, buy trees? I know know a lot of people in the industry from East Coast probably to West Coast. You know quite a few of them, but where can people find trees? Who would you recommend to go to? Maybe some resources people can go to and look up more information on apple trees.
Your local nursery in rural Minnesota can get you a chestnut crab. They can probably get you a doggle crab, and that's what I mean. It's a grafted crab. They can get you some of if you want a Harrow Red for your October, they can get you that. And it's your local nursery. Why I say metro nurseries? Watch out, you aren't buying dwarf trees, And there's lots of apple trees for deer. There's other big apples. I just lean towards the crab apples. I'm going back again. Some experts think crab apples will tolerate a slightly lower soil pH than apple trees. And I think crab apples can be less work than bigger apples. Just my opinion on my soil. Might not be right in all places.
Yep.
Where to get them? Your local nursery. You can locally, you name it. Locally, they have them.
You said dwarf tree?
They're on a dwarf rootstock.
Okay, what's that mean? No.
It's a different type of root under the apple tree that keeps the tree from growing too large. So the tree won't get very big. It's easy for people with a yard tree to go out and pick apples off the ground, but it's also very easy for deer to eat all the foliage off it. The limbs never grow above what the deer can reach. You do not want that dwarf rootstock. Most in the rural or smaller communities will sell you trees that will grow to bigger trees, which is what you want.
Okay.
Then there are wildlife specific nurseries that sell trees too. Blue Hill Wildlife Nurseries in Pennsylvania. The owner's Ryan, very intelligent guy. He's gone out and looked at thousands of wild trees in Pennsylvania and New York that ripen at different times, disease resistance. He has those available. He has a couple of my trees there, the Big Dog and the Buckman. I make no money off these trees when people buy them. I'm not in the business. Then we also have Luke at Midwest Deer Trees. He's right here, just a short distance from St. Cloud. You can look him up. But he has done the same thing in central Minnesota. He's got trees that he's grafted from wild trees that seem to stand out to him. He's got some of my trees. I know a guy called Turkey Creek has one of my trees. I call it Sweet Dog. It blooms. He likes it a lot. I'm not real sure when its prime drop time is. It's a crab that I grew from seed. Has an outstanding flavor if I can pick it at the right time, like a pear. And it's usually the first week of October, but it's on the edge of my sanctuary. So I don't watch it full time. I kind of leave it alone, maybe go in once and pick some and hope I can get it at the right time of ripeness. But that's Turkey Creek. He's in Kansas or Nebraska. He sells that one. There's other wildlife nurseries too. I have ordered trees from St. Lawrence Nursery in upstate New York. Their rootstock is different that they usually use. I struggle with that on my soil. I don't know why. Sure. Other people have good luck with it.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. This podcast here I'm going to go back to and listen to multiple times because there's a lot of information to digest, and there's a lot of great tips you have for making sure that when I'm planting these trees, they're going in the right spot and I'm going to get my money's worth out of them. You know what I mean? And that's what people need to do. If you're going to do something, you need to do it right. And these are some great tips that we can take with us. But lastly here, just any other advice you have for people out there that want to put some apple trees in the ground?
Well, same story again. Don't get your expectations too high, which I got a good deal. We're going to plant 10 and I'm going to have all this help. Don't plant too many. Start slowly. Look for the best ground. Don't forget the cost of fencing. Don't forget that. Mm-hmm. Got to keep the critters away. Bear, I don't know what to do there. Get a bear tag. That's the best thing I can tell you. Yeah. If it gets too bad, you got a bear tag, you probably can get permission to hunt earlier before season from the game warden.
Well, Art, I appreciate you being here with me today. Thank you for coming out and taking a look at
Joe.
My property. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I told you we were going to fill up our time. No problem. We start talking, we get going. We're on 51 minutes right now.
Joe had to show me the shed he found. I did beat him. I had one half that size a number of years ago, but I kind of lost it. I think it's a good luck charm. He should carry it in his pocket so he can judge how big those bucks really are when he's shooting them.
Yeah, exactly. If my kids don't lose it first, it end up in a toy box somewhere. But thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and until next time, take care.
Thank you, Joe.
You bet. Well, if you're anything like me, you're going to be going back and listening to this podcast again because there's so much information here to digest. If you want to invest in apple trees and get the most out of them, I like what Art said. You need to spend just as much on maintaining your apple trees as you do in purchasing your apple trees, and I think that's some great advice right there. But if you have any questions regarding apple trees, I highly recommend reaching out to Art Reuck. It's Reuck, so Art Reuck. Reach out to Art on Facebook, and he'll kind of point you in the right direction. He knows a lot of people in the apple tree business, I guess, that he could point you in the right direction. So I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Once again, just a special thanks to all of our partners: Arctic Shield, Domain Outdoor, J&R Outdoors, Skullcraft, Tactcam, The Fish Guide, and Fourth Arrow Camera Arms. It's a fun time of year. I love getting after it. I love getting my hands dirty, and this is what it's about, putting in the hard work and hopefully reaping the benefits later on this fall. So thanks again for joining in this week, you guys. We truly appreciate it, and have a great day.